If you've watched this channel before, you've heard me speak extensively about how movies and television don't do the fire service any favors. So in today's video, what I want to do is I want to address some common misconceptions regarding fire departments and firefighters in general. I'm going to go through each one and kind of explain some of the services fire departments do and don't provide, and go over what it's like to really be a firefighter. But first, I want to talk about our sponsor, Columbia Southern University. Now, Columbia Southern University is an all-online university based in Orange Beach, Alabama. Well, what does that mean for you? Because they are all online, they are more flexible than your traditional university where you would have to go and sit in a class. That means whatever obligations or anything else that you have going on in your life, whether it be personal, work, or family issues, you're able to fit their classes around your schedule when it's convenient for you. Now, they offer programs ranging from associates to bachelors to masters to PhDs, and in things ranging from cybersecurity to fire science to emergency medical services and more. If you're interested and like to check them out, I'll put the link in the description below, but go to columbiasouthern.edu/FFN to check them out and find out more. The first and one of the most common misconceptions about fire departments and firefighters is that firefighters are overpaid. Now, this is something that you'll see in newspaper headlines or internet article headlines, and they make for great clickbait and they really draw in a lot of people's attention. But those headlines don't tell you the whole story. For instance, what a lot of these stories will do is they will highlight one or two firefighters from maybe a handful of usually large departments throughout the country, and they'll talk about some enormous salary that they made in a given year. What they don't tell you is that for that person to make that huge salary for that given year meant they had to work an unbelievable amount of overtime, which might sound good to you and might sound awesome to you, but in reality, living at a fire station all the time, not sleeping, constantly running calls is miserable. Might be okay for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, but after that, it gets very, very wearing and it gets old. The other side of the story that they usually don't like to tell is that about 70% of firefighters in the United States today are volunteer only, which means they drop whatever it is that they're doing while they're in the middle of it to go fight a fire for very little money or usually free. Volunteer firefighters don't get nearly enough of the respect that they should, and they do a very difficult job for very little to no money. So firefighters being overpaid makes for a very good headline, but isn't necessarily always the truth. The next headline or misconception about the fire department is that less fires should mean less firefighters. Now, if you don't know much about the fire service, you might read that and think, well, that makes sense. But what you don't know is that 40, 50 years ago, when there were significantly more fires than there are today, the fires were much less dangerous. They were much less violent. The materials that were burning, the speed and the pace at which they burned were much, much slower. They were ordinary materials, things like wood and cotton and things like that. Today's fires are much more violent. They burn much hotter because most of the things in a given house are made out of plastic. They give off much more dangerous chemicals, and it's much more difficult to get these fires under control quickly. The other thing about less fires is fire departments in general have taken on a much, much larger role in the community, doing things like inspections, doing things like fire prevention, doing things like EMS calls, rescues, and a whole host of other things. So while it may be true that there are less fires overall, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should have less firefighters in your community. Which leads me to my next misconception, is that firefighters spend the day sitting around, hanging out, eating, and working out all day. Now, I actually did a video about this, about 10 different things that firefighters do every single day. But like I just said, they have picked up a much more expansive role within the community. They do things like prevention, whether it be company inspections, where the entire crew will go out and do an inspection of a particular building, usually a business or something like that. And that serves two purposes. A, it makes sure that that building is inspected and safe and meets all the fire code, but also it gives firefighters the opportunity to walk through a particular business and see what it's like in there. God forbid that there be a fire in that building in the future. They know where the entrances, the exits, all the main things that they would need to know. They get the opportunity to walk through and learn that. Now, the other thing that fire departments do is they do a lot of maintenance. They do maintenance on the hydrants. They do maintenance on the trucks. They do a lot of training day to day for themselves and for other people. They do CPR classes. They do smoke detector installs and a whole host of other things. So While it might make, again, for a good headline that firefighters just sit around and don't do much all day, that's usually not true because fire departments are doing other things in addition to just fighting fires. Now, another common misconception, and actually Firefighter Fenton did a funny video on this where he pointed out that some woman was taking a cell phone video and complaining about watching these firefighters do this, is that firefighters take big, heavy, expensive apparatus to go do trivial things. For example, do a quick search on YouTube and you'll see somebody questioning firefighters as to why they drove a fire truck to the grocery store, or why they drove a fire truck to go check a hydrant or do something else that seems essentially like a menial task that you could use any other vehicle to do. Well, the reason for that is so that firefighters, whether they're in the middle of doing something else, if a call comes in, are able to be on duty and respond immediately from right there. A lot of fire departments will have their firefighters go out and check every hydrant in the city every single year. And the last thing you want during an emergency is for the call to come in and for the firefighters to have to jump back on the truck, drive all the way back to the station, get out, change into their new gear, jump on the correct truck for whatever the situation is that they need, and then head to the fire or the rescue or the EMS call. You want them to be able to respond quickly and directly from where they are, which is why a lot of times you'll see fire departments or firefighters on fire engines or ladder trucks or ambulances doing things that you would deem a menial task. The next thing is that while fire departments have picked up a lot of other tasks and a lot of other things that they do, they have essentially become a catch-all for anything that's not police matters. Now, a lot of people don't know what services the fire department does and doesn't provide. And if you're unsure of what services your fire department does and doesn't provide, just give them a call and ask them. They'd be more than happy to talk to you and tell you what they do and don't do. But a lot of fire departments will get calls for things like filling up swimming pools, or another popular one is after a big rainstorm or a severe weather event to pump out basements or other buildings. And depending on your fire department, they may or may not do that. Certain things will be deemed an emergency while other things will not. Again, there's a limited amount of resources, and fire departments have to balance what they will and won't send their firefighters and their trucks to go do, and pull those resources away from other potential emergencies. So the fire department is not necessarily always a catch-all for everything that's going on or possibly is going wrong. The next one is that firefighters will risk their life and their safety no matter what. And this is where I think television and movies really do the fire service no favors. Now, ask any firefighter or really any shift commander or scene commander what that's like, and they will tell you that it's always a risk-reward balancing act. When you send firefighters into a particular situation, you need to weigh the risk of them getting hurt or dying with the reward of whatever is on the other side. Television and movies portray firefighters being very reckless, just running into buildings without gear properly on, or just running into flames and not really thinking, and that's not always the case. Now, firefighters obviously are willing to risk their health and their safety depending on what it is, but it might not always be a situation where firefighters are willing to risk themselves. For example, I had heard a story about a fire department that had gotten a call for a deer that had walked out onto a frozen pond, and people had called the fire department to go out and rescue that deer. The deer was just standing there on the ice, and that particular department said, no, we're not going to risk our firefighters going out on the ice and potentially falling through to rescue a deer that didn't really need rescuing because they could have walked back off themselves, which eventually the deer did. Well, these people were very upset with the fire department that they didn't send people to go do that. Again, it's a risk-reward. The risk of firefighters getting hurt and falling through the ice was certainly not worth the reward of potentially getting a deer to come back, which it eventually did on its own. And then finally, the last one is the idea of the Brotherhood in the fire service. Now, that is something that you will hear a lot regarding firefighters, and it is something that is certainly true. However, again, television and movies don't really portray fire departments accurately. They typically portray them as everybody's having a good time, everybody's buddies. There's all this sort of random ancillary drama going on in the background. And while there are certain things that are similar to that, there are a lot of fire departments where everybody does get along really well and crews that really mesh well together. Fire departments are no different than any other workplace where there's going to be people that you get along with really well, and there's going to be people that you don't get along with very well. Some of my closest friends and some of the best people I've ever met in my life have been firefighters, and that is certainly true in a lot of fire departments nationwide. but don't be fooled into thinking that just because you become a firefighter, you're going to immediately love going to work every single day and it's going to be the best day ever like they do in television and movies. So as always, I hope you found this useful and helpful. If you did, give this video a thumbs up, consider subscribing to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next video.